Good afternoon everyone, and welcome to the Editorialists. My name is Kate Taylor, I'm a programmer for the BFI London Film Festival, and it's my absolute pleasure to be welcoming you to this session where we're going to be considering how the film press works in an age of abundance. To do this, I'm joined by a crack team of critterati. We have Nick James, editor of Sight and Sound, who's been steering the magazine from the age of the fax machine to the shiny era of social media. Hannah McGill, a writer and broadcaster who contributes to many publications and is no stranger to the pleasures of exhibition, having previously been artistic director of the Edinburgh Film Festival. And I'm very excited that we've been joined from Berlin by David Hudson, who is the editor of Keyframe Daily on Fandor. How many of you are already subscribers to Keyframe Daily? Get the Daily Digest. Oh, guys, okay, you are in for a treat. So Keyframe Daily is basically every day into your inbox, everything that a cinephile could need. David basically synthesises all of the interviews with directors, festival reports, obituaries, films that are in the works, and it's a really lovely way of kind of connecting to international film culture. So for those of you who were at the Cinephile Activism session I hosted last year in Manchester, there we were looking at how personal and cultural politics inform what we do in our jobs. When you work in a cinema, when you're deciding what to screen, you quickly develop your box office head and you're aware of what's going to work and play well for your audience, and you kind of balance that out. So maybe by showing Lady in a Van for a very long time, that gives you an opportunity to show The Hard Stop or Rams, and you find ways of articulating that cultural argument as to why you show a broad variety of films. The press have a different but certainly connected set of criteria and their own sense of audience and readership. So with print, there was always an element of we kind of know what people are reading, maybe through the letters page, there's a feedback loop. But now we live in an age where reviews online, you can see quite quickly that perhaps a review of a Picture Pong or a Stackle film maybe will get a few views, and then a review of a Doctor Strange trailer will get many views. I don't know if anyone of you saw it yesterday, quite, I would say, controversially, maybe not, maybe we'll talk about this later. Peter Bradshaw in The Guardian actually reviewed an advert for H&M yesterday because it was directed by, lots of people's favourite auteur, Wes Anderson. So I suppose it's all about what kind of culture we want to support. I've asked each panellist to prepare a brief introduction with a question for you, the audience. So to start us off, Hannah.
Thank you, Kate. Hi, everybody. I'll just give you a little bit of background on my background, which I think is slightly interesting from a time point of view, because where I come from as a film critic sort of straddles the period when the internet became the primary way that we consumed film criticism, if not indeed film, controversially. So I started out very much a print journalist. I graduated from Glasgow University in 2000. I was initially employed as a music critic and then as a TV critic. I had done a degree in film studies, so I had always wanted to write about film, even at that point in time when there were still many, many gainfully employed film critics. It was still relatively difficult to find a full-time job as one. I was quite fortunate in that the very, very long-serving film critic for the Herald, William Russell, retired, and his job came up, and I took that job. Now, it's interesting for me looking back on that time that being a film critic at that point, it seemed to be, for me at that time, a thing that I was trained to do and could do, and it didn't seem to be that massively controversial that I would do it. I was not subject to people commenting on everything that I wrote. I would receive letters into the office occasionally, nowhere near as many letters actually as I got as a TV critic, but if someone felt really strongly, they would write me a letter. But basically you were operating, as an expert, relatively speaking, or defined by your employers as an expert. My remit was to review every film that came out in Scotland that week. In the time that I was doing that job, which was about 5 years, the critical mass, the volume of films that came out in a week went up hugely, and I think is still going up. So it went from being around, 5 or 6 films a week to 12, 13. Doing that from Scotland was very, very difficult because the film industry, as you all know, is concentrated in London, and having access to press screenings from anywhere outside of London is very, very hard. This was also prior to really wide availability of DVD screeners, let alone internet links to things. So a lot of my life was spent trying to persuade people to do film screenings in Scotland or travelling to London. I eventually, in the last couple of years of doing that job, moved to London simply to be able to see the films. So these are all things that are sort of, it's interesting how quickly all of this stuff has changed. It hasn't changed that much that you still kind of need to be in London to have real access to the main sort of bunch of important films that you need to see in that to be a sort of week-on-week film critic. So at that time, it did not seem to be a controversial thing or a big deal to be a professional film critic, that was my full-time job and that was something I would get paid for properly. I don't remember actually ever thinking that option was going to go away. I did stop doing it because in the time of doing that job I became a consultant programmer for the Edinburgh Film Festival. That was largely to do with pooling resources in that I was going from Scotland to various international film festivals and I was able to advise Edinburgh on films that I'd seen when I was travelling, so I sort of split my attention when I was going to Cannes or Berlin or Sundance to see films that I could also advise the film festival. Then the artistic directorship of the film festival came up and I went for it and got it. So I sort of left film criticism to do a different job. And I think that's actually a really healthy thing to do as a critic, to put yourself on the other side of the operation, to put yourself in a position to be critiqued and criticised and to have your curation and your programming sort of assessed by other people. What did also happen though was that in the few years that I was doing the film festival job, the film criticism market and the scene in this country changed utterly. I mean, it was already on the way to changing. But when I emerged from doing the film festival job and kind of wanted to go back to being a critic, it was very apparent that to be a full-time critic living in Scotland and to expect to earn a living wage was not very realistic. And that remains the case. I mean, it's fortunate for me that I have other outlets, including Sight and Sound, and I do a lot of broadcast stuff and things, but I live a very, very hand-to-mouth existence as a film critic now. And that is having, been a relatively prominent film critic in this country for quite a lot of years now. It's not by any means a secure position. I'm also aware that I feel slightly left behind by history, or slightly that I'm on the wrong side of the way things are supposed to be now, in that I was never especially interested in being a massively controversial or confrontational critic. And so the question about politics, I always thought that film criticism was a political act in a sort of soft way, in that I think that all criticism is reminding you to be an aware viewer, an aware listener, to be conscious of what is being fed to you, to question where it's coming from and what it's telling you, to question what's underneath the obvious. So I think it's always political without having to be directly political or to direct you in any particular way. I think that what I see now when I look at the way that criticism has mushroomed online, whether it's professional or amateur criticism online, is where I feel alienated is this very strongly sort of moralistic sort of film criticism, which is like, I object to how this person feels about this, I object to what this film says about this. I never thought that was part of my job, to make a moral judgment about what a film was saying. I think to question the aesthetics of a film or the presentation of a film or the messages that it's giving is completely part of what you do as a critic. I think that to try and impose a set of values, to sort of come along with a grid of values and try and place it over a film that you're watching is pointless. An artist is a free agent, and you can't just wag your finger at people and tell them that they're wrong. So my question would be, to what extent do we require criticism to be a moral act? And that's my little history.
Fantastic, thank you. All right, Nick. And I should say that these images have been chosen by the panellists. They're not a critique. It was Hannah's image.
This is so old, actually. Look, that's from 1985. So this is pre-internet, way pre-internet. I used to have this pinned up on my fridge when I was a full-time film critic.
Okay. Look, I'm not going to go too much about my personal history, because I've been on the scene for a very long time, and I've been the editor of Sight and Sound for nearly 20 years, actually. And I lucked into that job, and I think most people in these positions, there was a large element of luck in how you arrived there. And I'd been a musician beforehand, and I'd been at art school. So that's my background, vaguely. Sight and Sound began in 1932. It was an educational magazine originally. It was published by the British Film Institute. It has been all along. Crucially, in 1990, it was merged with another publication called the Monthly Film Bulletin. And so Sight and Sound has this kind of history and tradition of being a journal of record. And this is what's really germane to the beginning of what I want to talk about here, because we've tried to be a record of every single film released in the UK every year. Well, that's over. Forget it. We haven't been a journal of record for at least 2 or 3 years now, because it's impossible to review. We don't have the resources to review everything that's put out. And it's also impossible because, in my view, the FDA, the Film Distributors Association, don't police it well enough to distinguish what is a real film release anyway. I know you've talked about the plenitude of releases this morning, but it's impossible to really decide. That wonderful example of The 13th, which went straight to Netflix, but they announced that it was on in other cinemas, but actually was only on in one cinema, and you could only see it in one cinema, is an example of the kind of thing I mean. It's going to have implications for Sight and Sound going forward, which will probably come up in the conversation later. I don't want to labour too much about that right now. But one of the things that moving away from being a journal of record, as I think we're going to have to, means that we're going to be more choosy. And I think that one of the things that critics are going to be more useful if they're trusted. I mean, it's about how the audience decides who is a trusted critic. And our aim at Sight and Sound is to be as reliable as possible for people reading about films, which is why we publish at length. But we also don't tend to think of ourselves so much as being recommenders of films for a Friday night. We're just as interested, in fact probably more interested, in publishing the kind of writing that gets read after you see the film rather than beforehand. So how we decide what gets reviewed now that, and what gets covered, it's going to get more and more difficult. At present, we still use the tried and tested means of seeing as many films internationally as we can at film festivals that might be of interest to our readers. We also have our radar of freelancers and other people who will let us know when they think that something's really interesting. But you get then the problems of herd instinct, which Hannah's already touched on, and I'm sure we'll talk about later on. But, you know, I'm actually very present on social media, and so are one or two others on the team. So we have what I think is quite an extensive radar, but the dangers are that you get, just as has happened in recent elections, that you get funneled into the tunnels of everybody slapping each other on the back and saying, you know, this is the stuff you should be interested in, and you may miss things because of that. And I'm sure that in the future, Sight and Sound will miss covering important films. I can't see how we can avoid missing them somehow. We have to improve our radar to the point where it's minimised to as much as possible. The other thing is that, you know, Sight and Sound for a long time, and just the politics issue, we've always been really primarily an aesthetic magazine. We are about film as an art form. That's the thing that matters most to us. To some extent, I don't really care how many people come to see the films. You know, it's not really my job, that's your job. You know, what I'm interested in, what Sight and Sound is interested in, is you know, describing this great art form at its best. And it's not just film going forward, obviously, because, you know, the feature film as a model is falling apart in front of our eyes in terms of where the great work might be. You know, long-form television, shorts, internet series, all kinds of interesting stuff are going on that are challenging the hegemony of the feature film, and Sight and Sound, you know, is going to want to reflect that as best it can going forward. Yes, and one of the things I wanted to say is that we've all had to face over the last, and I think this is true for all the arts, in the same way as the government has been talking about, how the humanities are, the disparaging of the humanities, the removal of certain humanities subjects from examinations, and in universities, the arts themselves have suffered a loss of status. And film in particular has suffered a loss of status. And I think one of the things we might try to aim for is to sort of push its status back up again in terms of how important it is to people in the world. I think it's lost. I'll come to. There's another point about that I'll come to just shortly. In terms of politics, I think that one of the things that happened in the last couple of years is we've become a more political magazine through two or three things. One is that we realised I particularly realised after having edited the magazine for such a long time, and my proportion of women writers, my proportion of people of colour writing for the magazine, remaining at such a poor level because we're not forcing it, that we changed. We forced it, and we're forcing it all the time. The first question we ask when we're commissioning a piece is, what woman do we know can write this? Is the first question we ask. And so, it's pushing upwards. There are more and more women writing for Sight and Sound. And with our recent Black Star season at the BFI and the compendium that James Bell of Sight and Sound put together, we have introduced ourselves to a lot of new BAME writers, and representation of them on the magazine in particular, and Asian writers next year, because there's a big Asian push next year, are things that we're pushing up. And so by default we're becoming more political, but these are more political times, and I feel that one of the reasons why there are so many documentaries on the cinema is not just because television won't show them anymore, it's because we're more politicised, we're more interested in politics on screen than the audience were, say, 10, 12 years ago. It's a more politicised scene. Sight and Sound wants to reflect that. I think it's very important. Finally, I've talked about convergence. What I really think is missing, and this image sort of sums it up for me, where's the romance in that? So cinema, when I joined it all those ancient years ago, it wasn't 1932, but it was 1990. There's a romantic feeling in the conversation between filmmakers, between people going to see films, between critics. It felt like there was an alive culture that had its excitement and its romance. And there are two things. One is, I think, that digital media, the fact that all the communication goes on electronically is destroying that. But I also think the PR industry destroyed it by insisting on putting walls between critics and directors. I mean, directors, they're not stars. They don't really need a PR industry between them and critics. They can choose which critics they want to talk to themselves. I mean, it's bizarre. And I feel that that's, if we can reach for one thing, the question I would ask you is, how can we bring the romance back to the moving image? And that's what I want to say.
Okay, thank you. All right, Andy.
Okay, yeah. Well, in a way, I'm sort of glad that you've never heard of Keyframe Daily or what it is I do. So I'll fill you in a little bit. I've been involved in online publishing in one way or another for almost exactly 20 years now. It was 1996, just after I'd moved to Berlin, when a friend of mine that I'd worked with back in San Francisco had an idea for a zine. Back in the mid-90s, the zines were kind of all the rage on the web because it was, there was before Facebook, Twitter, et cetera. It was the platform. The zines on paper had their heyday in the punk era and all that. So our idea was to confront the prevailing ideas of online culture at the time, primarily propagated by Wired magazine. So we would toss around terms like cyber-libertarianism, techno-utopianism, and try to explain about how dangerous it was. The zine became a book, and it became a cover story for the San Francisco Bay Guardian and all that. The point being is that this partnership between myself and Andrew back in San Francisco was formed, and that we had, over time, established an editorial stance. We were unapologetically political, we leaned left, we emphasized community, we both organically but also technologically, in other words, created an actual community online that where people who could come and discuss these issues and all that. Fast forward several years and several jobs. For a while I wrote for Der Spiegel's website, sort of a daily briefing about German politics and culture. And after, I would write this text, and then at the bottom I thought it might be nice just to sort of add a link or two. Just, you know, the Guardian has just reviewed this new German novel, or the New York Times has just written about the art scene in Berlin. And over time, the link section began to creep up and take over the text section, and I had basically caught the blogging bug. So in the 2000s, Andrew Sullivan called again. He was launching a company called Green Scene, which was a DVD by mail thing, which seemed like a going thing at the time. We would be to Netflix what the video corner store on the corner was to Blockbuster, may it rest in peace. You know, you would go to Blockbuster or in the DVD by mail era, Netflix being the big label for your mainstream viewing needs, but then we would be either the alternative to or the complement to that particular account. That too, in a way, an editorial stance. I would post on Green Scene to get the conversations going and all that, little bits of news and all that. Eventually that became its own blog, Green Scene Daily, which from 2003 to 2008 was kind of a thing. I would get these out of the blue emails from critics I'd grown up reading and admiring, filmmakers, festival programmers, and I was realizing there's a readership here. Unfortunately, the financial crisis came along, didn't kill Green Scene off altogether, but I took my thing, whatever this was, to IFC, then Mubi for a few years, and then since 2012 to a company called Fandor, another company based in San Francisco. And it is the streaming equivalent of these alternatives. It complements too. It's a streaming service that you can either use alongside or instead of one of the biggies like Netflix or Amazon or something like that. A typical daily entry will be I'll link to maybe, particularly an essay people are talking about. The idea is a daily briefing. It's like if you're passionate about cinema, and that's kind of my criterion for how I choose what to do. In other words, if I had a different day job, but I were still as passionate about cinema as I actually am, what would I want to know about? What do I not have time to catch up with that I really need to know about? That's the criteria. If it fits, then I include it into that daily roundup and into that daily entry. So there'll be links to debates. Every year or so there comes up the death of cinema debate or something like that. Lists, of course, awards and all that. And that'll be the briefing sort of entry, but then there are other kinds of entries. A beloved filmmaker dies, he or she gets his own entry. Festival lineups, particularly Cannes, for example, because whenever Cannes announces his lineup, that's going to set the agenda for several months at least, possibly all the way through the end of the year. And then there are some films that get entries of their own, and that brings us to the question facing us on the panel as to how do I choose those? What's the criteria for choosing that? And it's basically a matter of whether or not that particular film is news. There are filmmakers that we either at Fandor or the people who use Fandor or the people that we talk with on Twitter and Facebook, filmmakers we know that people are particularly interested in, maybe a Nate Silver and Alex Ross Perry, who is not going to get perhaps a film in at a festival and all that if he or she Josephine Decker, for example, we're nuts about her. If she's working on, that she's going to get her own entry. But primarily, when I was thinking about this, whenever Kate brought this up, I was thinking, actually, I'm pretty bound to the festival schedule. If it's, the Cannes lineup, it's not just because Thierry Frémaux has chosen it. It's because, number one, yes, he's chosen it. And literally thousands of journals are going to be flying across the ocean and all that to cover it. So, the German comedy that wows the crowds, or whenever Berlin chooses an 8-hour film by Lav Diaz to spring on Meryl Streep and her jury, including Nick, that's news, and that's an event, and therefore it gets an entry on its own. So I've got two questions, basically, to throw out to the crowd. One is, and I've got ideas on this, but what then is the future of festivals? Because that's going to, as festivals evolve, believe me, coverage will evolve, and the ranking or hierarchy or the decision as to which films get attention, which don't, that's going to evolve along with them. And the other question, less important, is, skip that question. I don't want to drop let's drop it there.
Okay, well, the future of festivals. Okay, we've got loads of meaty stuff from each of you there. Hannah, you got your job through someone's retirement. Now I'd argue it'd probably be assassination to get a gig in paid criticism, if there are going to be any coming up. Also, the importance of controversy in contemporary film discourse, and the question, does film criticism have to be a moral act? Nick, you mentioned the FDA and what is a real release, like with the 13th as a good example, and how you build up a sense of a trusted critic. A loss of status in terms of film culture in general, which is something that we all are considering when we're thinking about the primacy or not of cinema going as a habit, and how to push that back up. How greater diversity in writers provides a greater diversity of voices. And I'm going to start on this because you said, you don't care how many people come and see the films, which, I mean, maybe you do care a little bit. But
it was a deliberate provocation.
but you're saying that's the cinema's job. But but I presume you care how many people read Sight and Sound.
Yes.
So I'm wondering if you can talk about, how you identify your audience and, who they are.
We identify our audience by doing surveys regularly. We've just done one, and our audience is very well educated, and it's right across the age range, roughly evenly distributed from around 24 to 80. It's at the moment most magazines have suffered massive declines in circulation over the last 10 years. We've suffered quite a small proportion, but we have had a decline for sure. And our desire is to get them back and get more back. But I think that we're limited by the fact that it's going to be people who are particularly interested in the moving image who are going to read us anyway. I think there are another 10,000 people we could possibly get to read the magazine, but I don't think there's another 50,000.
And do you see it as part of your role? One of the things that David mentioned about if I wasn't in this as my day job, or I always think if I was a teenager and I just saw like Embrace of the Serpent for the first time and I was like, oh my God, mind blown, and then someone tells me about Herzog and then I'm like, whoa, where am I going to go to read about it? Is that one of Sight and Sound's functions?
Absolutely. As I say, I think our emphasis is on being read after seeing the film to some extent. We're not Friday night tipsters. I mean, obviously there is a recommendation element to our film reviews, but I think
you choose a film of the week as well, don't you?
We do choose a film of the week. We do like to put film online. We have online. We have film of the week, and we do like to publish on the big film of the week. We put Doctor Strange up, when it comes out. And the monthly magazine is anyway at a disadvantage with the big Hollywood releases because they tend to be editing them up till the week beforehand, so we don't get to see them in time for the print magazine anyway. So it's an obvious thing to do that we would put a major Hollywood film up online for free. But our online reviews, some are stratospheric and some just vanish. It's partly because we're obliged to be part of the BFI website, and we're quite hard to find on that BFI website, which
Everything is
is
hard to
about to be redone because it needs to be redone.
Really great news.
When did you start doing live reviews online?
I've been doing it for a couple of years, and we've been doing them. I mean, it is chosen. We choose the films specifically that we think will work best online. Doctor Strange being a perfect example, because otherwise you'd be reading about Doctor Strange like 6 weeks after it came out, which is fine, but it feels a little...
You don't get your readership.
Yeah.
And is there a big difference in terms of the other content that you have as online only? So some of the kind of festival reports and other articles.
I think there's an
how do
awful
you
lot of stuff
differentiate?
there's an awful lot of stuff we've been publishing over the last couple of years that we will not be publishing in future because it just doesn't get any response. It's great for us in terms of our relationship, say, with the Marseille Film Festival, which is a brilliant festival for finding avant-garde stuff. But quite frankly, like 5 people read the report from Marseille. I mean, it's sometimes 12. I mean, it's not worth our time and effort to reach 12 people.
Maybe those 12 people have their minds blown.
It's possible, and but I have to marshal limited resources and use them in the best way I can. And we will undoubtedly cover Marseille in the future at some point, but we will do fewer of those sorts of special services to places around the world, because we want to really change Sight and Sounding to be much more kind of trusted place for recommendations for this is what really matters.
I don't want to diverge too much, but one of the keynotes this morning was about design, and I think that whenever the revamp comes, it's probably going to help tremendously. To the point where if you're easily accessible, if it's almost being pushed at you, that I could easily imagine Sight and Sound become like, because they review it, therefore I need to know about it.
Yes.
That's creating this. Instead of, wouldn't it be nice to hear about the Marseille? Is you need to know because we're doing it.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah.
So we're not moving entirely away from the Journal of Record Base, but we do want to feel much less like a catalogue, and we do want to be, a little bit like, say, the London Review of Books or something like that, in terms of we're picking on the best things and getting the best writers to write about the best things. I mean, we're not going to massively reduce the number of films we cover, but we are going to cover fewer, for sure. And how we choose that in relationship to what you guys are putting out there is going to be tricky and difficult, and politically, will involve a lot of negotiation, I expect, and some upset at times.
Hannah, I wonder, because you write about books as well and other kind of cultural journalism, I wonder how you see it as a critic writing about film. Do those other areas give you more or less scope for creativity? Is there...
I think people are a lot more likely to feel that you're treading on their territory or that you don't know what you're talking about when you're talking about cinema. There is a great sense of who the hell do you think you are with cinema, which I haven't experienced with anything else that I write about. And that includes music, television, books, theatre, visual art. Cinema, people get really arsy about. And I think it's because it's always been a populist medium. It's been something in which people feel ownership. It's been something where if you pretend that you're all hoity-toity about it, and you've got a degree in it, there's something wrong with you. You're pretending somehow. And I think that's because film academia is still a relatively recent discipline. It's still regarded as something of a sort of Mickey Mouse thing to pretend to be an expert in. And so there is a sense that people sort of want to challenge you about it all the time. And I was very naive, I was very young when I first had a full-time job as a film critic. I was just in my early 20s, and the idea that people would kind of go, who the hell are you to do that job? It hadn't occurred to me. I was like, well, I'm qualified. I got the job. I don't know. I mean, I'm not asking to fix your toilet. You're the plumber. It never really occurred to me, but it has become more and more noisy over the past.
Let me just come in on that a minute, because it's like one of the things that really shocks me is that when you talk to the literati, about cinema, they're only interested, a lot of them, in the blockbusters, and they think that all this effort we put into finding art films and all the rest of it is ridiculous.
But that's part of what I'm talking about, is that people
It's
have
a kind
this
of
idea
snobbery.
that, yes, it's snobbery and reverse snobbery all at the same time. It's just like, why is this important? And I don't want to just be snotty about it, but I have found that it is a sort of professional area in which people feel uniquely compelled to sort of challenge your expertise, let's say. And I think that has gone from being something that I just slightly noticed in my personal life, that people would literally say to me, I could do your job. I'd be like, could you? I've got a deadline in 2 hours, go do it. You know? To that now being a fairly overwhelming thing. And I think that film critics get an extremely hard time just sort of online and so on, because there is this idea that it's somehow something that you shouldn't pronounce an authoritative opinion on. Now, as I said before, I never thought that I was pronouncing an authoritative yes or no on whether a film was worthwhile or not. I always thought that the point of it was to open avenues for interest or debate, or to challenge what you were being shown. I never thought that I was laying down whether something was worthwhile or not, which is, you know, one of the reasons I like writing for Sight and Sound, is that you're not required to sort of recommend a film or not. You're required to kind of talk about it and analyze it and offer different ways of looking at it. But I think there is this kind of competitive impulse that comes along with film criticism, and it has become kind of deafening in the last 5 or 10 years, which is that if I, as an amateur, have an opinion about a film, then why do you, as a professional, have a more important opinion? Now, it's fair enough to debate that. It's fair enough to debate whether being qualified in something makes you more qualified in it.
What's odd about that is that it's precisely the opposite direction that technology was supposed to take us.
Yeah.
In other words, that I mean, when I was blogging very early on, I noticed when I read a review by Manola Dargis in the New York Times and a review by a guy named Girish Shambhu, who's actually an economics teacher in Buffalo, I kind of like Girish's better sometimes, or it's at least it's on equal footing. You know, he knows his stuff. This is a real person, by the way. He knows his cinema. He's passionate about it, and so I'm reading them also off the same screen.
Yeah.
You know, there was this, years ago, the beginning of the realization that technology actually is a leveling field, and I would purposefully, give equal time to the unknown bylines as much as possible. So this is not supposed to be happening. What you're experiencing. Another interesting thing too is that whenever you have a name, say made in another field, like say Jeff Dyer writes a book about Tarkovsky, that flips it over again. In other words, no one's challenging him because they understand he's writing from his specific point of view as an essayist, and not as a cinephile.
I don't have a problem with that at all. I mean, I think there was a phase, certainly when I was being a full-time film critic, that certainly the Sunday newspapers went through a little phase of taking on people who were famous in other fields, Zadie Smith and Will Self and Julie Burchill, and they never lasted very long because generally they went, God, this is taking up loads of my time. I really need to go and write a book.
Now I have to watch another bad film.
Yeah, and I think, absolutely, people come along who are not, Paul Mason wrote a piece for The Guardian recently about cinema in the era of Trump or whatever. And,
it was quite poor.
It was quite poor because he didn't know anything about cinema, but, fair enough.
Well, David, I wonder, I mean, you mentioned kind of Girish there, and he seems to be someone, he's written this book, The New Cinephilia. A lot of it seems to be about this way that audiences interact with film now, and that kind of jumping between reading the Sight and Sounds and film comments, but also, reading the Facebook walls and things being connected and having access to critical voices via Twitter. I wonder, I mean, kind of what you do as well, it seems to me like a new role of a cultural aggregator, almost. So you're now, there's such an abundance of criticism that we now require a curator just to get the good stuff.
But David, can I ask you? I mean, there must be prejudices of your own that come.
Of course, that's the point. Yes. And in 2010 there was I think I included it in the bio here for the catalog here. There was an article on the state of online criticism in film comment by Paul Brunick, and he's called me, and I'm not the only one. I mean, we are legion. I think he called it a new kind of editor as aggregator, or, and I've always preferred this title to curator, criticism jockey. You know,
A CJ.
a CJ. I mean, and I liked that. It was, yeah, we're gonna open with a hit that everybody likes. You know, then we're gonna switch to a deep cut, and then we're gonna, you know. So yeah, Girish's book is really interesting. It's a almost like a monograph in a way, and I highly recommend it, called The New Cinephilia. It's a counter-argument in a way to the prevailing idea that Twitter is pure noise, that Facebook is degenerate culture, that et cetera. What he was pointing to, basically, the people that he follows and that follow him, that he was pointing out that there are actual worthy conversations going on these in these media, that it's possible.
In fact, their conversations are so intense and go on so much, I think you could spend your whole life just reading.
Yeah.
Is it somewhere that you would go to look for writers, though? Would you find someone who was being great on Twitter?
One of our writers is in the centre of that. Asian Martin's very much part of that, and he writes for us occasionally. So I feel like I've got
keep an eye.
I've got a finger in that pie, if you like, and that's one of the editorial stances that I try to make sure is that we have, if I know about a pie, there'll be somebody there who has connections to us that we can, so that, David Jenkins, for example, who's the editor of Little White Lies, which might be seen by some as a rival magazine to ours, is nonetheless somebody I've occasionally published because, I think he's a brilliant writer and there's great stuff that he's got his finger on the pulse of. And so, I'm really interested in trying to reflect as much as I can of what's going on in English language writing about film.
But does it also mean, you've got social media makes it easier for filmmakers and journalists to be kind of friends in a very visible way. Does that, obviously these friendships would kind of naturally occur and, networks between also audience members and emerging kind of programmers as well as venue staff as well. But does it also add an extra kind of pressure in terms of advocacy when not only have you got all of these relationships on the go, but these relationships are all public and then you have to write in a critical way? Does that...
Well, I think I can speak to that quite well because my wife is a producer and I know quite a lot of people who are actually filmmakers and so on and so forth. And so I have to have a rule where I don't write about anything that's remotely connected to my wife unless it's purely on a kind of uncritical way. That's happened. I did a diary from the set of a Terence Davies film I was lucky enough to be on, but that's the only thing I've ever published that's been to do with what my wife does. But it means I know a lot of filmmakers, and some of them I would count as either friends or almost friends, and I know a lot of screenwriters too. And the friendships with critics is another thing as well. The gang mentality. You've got to be careful of that. But in fact, if you're friends with the critics, you just spend your whole time arguing with each other. You don't form a kind of cabal at all. You just take them, especially if you're British. You just take the mickey out of each other all the time. If you read Jonathan Romney, don't believe a word. He's my best friend. I was his best man at his wedding.
Before on that, just quickly, the classic example, of course, is the Kahir crowd. Where they were all critics and filmmakers, and they all hung together. And that was a pretty fertile ground. A contemporary example would have to be Locarno, CinemaScope.
Yep.
We've got a lot of overlap there between an extremely influential magazine and I think probably, one of the festival that's really on the rise. This festival is, I'm noticing that I do more single entries on films from Locarno than a few years ago I just did a Locarno entry. Now it's like a dozen of these films are so fascinating to read about that I want you readers to know about this particular one and all that. So, but there's a lot. It's Mark Berenson, the editor, who's also a programmer at Locarno. It's who's friends with Dennis Lim, who's a programmer in the Film Society of Lincoln Center in New York. There's kind of a crowd there, and it's probably beneficial ultimately. There's going to be eyebrows raised, Mark has appeared in a film by Albert Serra, who once won the Golden Leopard. But it's more. We get more out of it than there is more to suspect, I think.
So would you say that there is a kind of coherent set of kind of filmic values, a type of film that would be the Locarno type of film that would also be pushed by CinemaScope? So I guess I'm getting
viewed
at...
as extremely suspect by Sight and Sound because it's being pushed by CinemaScope.
Right, okay. Well, maybe festivals is a good thing to talk about now because you mentioned the festival calendar, and I wonder if you can... I mean, Nick, it'd be interesting to get a sense of the sense of speed that is required now with festival coverage.
Yeah, I used to... Going to Cannes used to be the most glorious privilege you could ever imagine, and I'm still privileged, but I was more privileged in those days because I could go to Cannes, spend 2 weeks there, hanging out, watching films, talking to people on the street, and not have to write a single word until I came home. What a glorious time that was. Unimaginable now. I mean, now you come straight out of the film. I'm not complaining. This is not a hard life. It's just different. You've got to tweet straight away about the film because you want to be one of the first people to tweet about it. And then you're going to go at the end of the day, or if you're the person designated, and I try and spread this around as many writers as possible to do what we call a first look review. You just run straight to your apartment and you write a first look review, which for us is only 600 words, but it's got to be written fast and get it out there because we're not as maniacal as Variety and Screen and Hollywood Reporter are about this, but we don't want to be publishing 3 days after the film was shown. We want to be part of the conversation.
And do you think that's ever to the detriment of the films, that you have to kind of come up,
well,
churn
it
out
is
an
to the
opinion straight
detriment
away?
of films, and that's why we have two different. That's why we review it again.
Okay.
We don't rely on those first look reviews because there's lots of occasions when a film I've been really dubious about the first time I've seen it, for example, and I've seen it later and thought, actually, no, this is brilliant. Or, as happens sometimes at Cannes, especially towards the end, you're watching a film and you're dog-tired and you're not really giving it as much attention as you should. Cemetery of Splendor, for example, the Apichatpong film, I wrote something fairly middling and non-committal about it because I was so tired when I was watching it. I was really finding it hard to take in. I saw it again 2 months later and I thought it was magnificent, one of the greatest films I'd ever seen. So you kind of change your mind and then you write about it again. And you just have to be honest that it's weird that some people seem to think that critics are not allowed to change their mind. Anyone can change their mind about a film. It's perfectly legit.
And in terms of the loss of status of films, I remember there was an editorial. Obviously, last year was a poor year in the cinemas for foreign language films, and I think you put a rather controversial, I thought, proposition, which was in your editorial of the Sight and Sound that followed that, which was maybe what we need to do is all focus on a consensus on which are the films that we should focus on, and focus on fewer films and then push them more rather than having a variety, which goes against most things I believe in, and yet I thought it was an interesting kind of position to take. When we're thinking of lists, and so we're thinking of consensus, and we're about to enter list time, where pretty much all of the critical dialogue online will first of all be the kind of end of year lists, and then into the awards lists, what should be nominated, what hasn't been nominated. It's kind of like you want to shut your laptop for like 3 months if that's not your way. But do you feel that the groundswell, I guess, David, because you have to read it all, do you feel this is kind of stifling like a few months of the year, that so much of the criticism just becomes about what's number one and what got voted for and what didn't?
Fortunately, there's space in the online environment is unlimited. So I don't have to pay attention to that. But at the same time, this is something that was also brought up in an earlier panel, there's enough other stuff to write about because this is when the studios are rolling out the films for the first time that they hope will make it, will into the running in the awards race. So there's always something else going on that's of interest. As a matter of fact, I know that some of the readers come to the Daily as sort of relief from, it's like, okay, what else is going on behind the curtain, in another ring of the circus, what else is going on? So that's not the formula for clickbait. In other words, I don't score traffic that way, but I hold on to the readers that I do have, and that's enough for me. So.
And would, I guess, either of you, this idea of canon building, is this still something that should be central to film criticism, to saying, okay, right, well, the top 10 are the essentials that everyone should see?
Well, Nick knows that I have zero interest in canon building, and I never, ever participate in any of the lists, and it's partly because I have
You get asked every time, though.
I have a bad memory. I can never remember what I've seen. I don't naturally order things in my head that way. I don't think in terms of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I'm suspicious of it, because I think that consensuses build for the wrong reasons. I think they build because by natural human instinct, you hear other people talking about something, you go, oh yeah, that was good. Oh yeah, other people that I respect think that was good. Blah, blah. And very easily your brain sidelines things that only you thought was good, or that only you saw, or that only you and 3 other people saw. And I think it's very easy to just go along with a mainstream flow, even if you are generally a very smart independent thinker. I think the pressure of canon building sort of narrows the stream like that, and you end up with everyone pretending that they love Mulholland Drive. And I like Mulholland Drive, but I don't think it's convincing that everybody suddenly goes, it's the greatest film ever made, And this comes from my experience as a festival programmer more than my experience as a critic, really, that I think that we would find really good films, but because they had not been endorsed by other festivals, because they were not within the critical radar of this has been endorsed by this person, this person, this person, and this person, and it has become part of that bottleneck of officially good films this year, that they get forgotten about. And so, and I know that maybe participating in the canon building might be a way to diversify that. I understand that. I realise that I'm arguing against myself to some extent. But I think there is a very real tendency for a small number of films to rise to the top and everybody to just reference them. And I think it's wonderful for certain outlets to just go, let's not talk about those at all. Everyone's going to be talking about these 5 films, let's talk about the other ones. And as you say, the internet permits the space to do that, and that's fantastic. I get very bored by the idea that because 300 people say this was my number 3 film, that becomes one of the important films of the year, as opposed to the film that was 20th or 30th, or that I might not have seen or heard about, and it's sort of, I don't know, in a way there's no other way of taking majority opinion. It's a democratic way of doing things, but I find it not that interesting, personally.
I've got two things here. One is that the editorial you referred to, what I was trying to get at there is it's a kind of defence of the position of the foreign language film in distribution terms. It's unquestionable that there are way too many films appealing to what used to be called the specialist market. Mm-hmm. And so the audiences get spread too thinly across too many titles, and it makes it unsustainable. So for me, it's just an economic model. If I'd quite like lots of people to go out of business so there were fewer films around. It's not personal, but I just, I think it would be better for the art form if there were fewer films being released. I really do, because you have to, there would have to be more choice involved. But this is all to do with, how you rank things and how you rate them and so on and so forth, and that's a different, you would expect me to be defending the canonical approach to some extent, because we do that famous poll every 10 years where we decide what they are. But actually, when we publish the full results of what everybody votes for the year, if you go into that,
that's true.
You will find hundreds of different titles being recommended by hundreds of different people. And actually, that document that we produce every year, and especially the 10-year one, is just like the smorgasbord of cinema. And that's the way I look at that. There are things on there that people recommend. You go, what was that? Where can I find that? There are, in the back of my mind, there's a whole list of things that I may never get to see that I've sort of I'm hungering for because somebody I respected really thinks it's great, you know.
So that there's a discovery kind of element to it in terms
There's
of
a big
making stuff.
discovery to it
also,
when you dig down deep.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right. I mean, it's the Oscars really. It's the sort of award season that drives me crazy. Although when my daughter was still living at home, we did like to watch the red carpet on the E Channel. That was always good.
I suppose The Assassin as well would have benefited last year from winning the poll in terms of when it did get released. It did have that kind of extra push behind it.
Yeah, it is, and there have been a few foreign language successes this year, a few more than there had been the year before.
Yeah.
But there's a real danger that it's just going to vanish altogether from big screens, and then it just becomes a job of the institutions like the one I work for, you know, and is this a professional result of the xenophobia that we're seeing in politics? You know, is foreign language cinema dying because we're all secret xenophobes?
Is it the other way around? Are people more xenophobic because they're getting less exposure to other cultures?
Possibly.
Perhaps this is a good time to open it out to the audience. So, guys, do you have some questions? We have some roving mics. Okay, so the question was about film 2016. A few weeks ago, reviewed the film 100 Streets. It had a very limited release. And would not have been seen by most people in the country, so why did they pick that film? I mean, obviously we can't answer that in terms of the producers will have said that, but I imagine that it probably had really good materials in terms of junket kit with interviews and a decent trailer or kind of materials that would have fitted into their thing. I mean, film 2016, this is a big thing to talk about if we're gonna, we've only got 2 minutes, but I really, has everyone here watched the Camilla Long one? Yeah. Yeah? Okay, well you kind of, it's astonishing television, but it's very interesting to watch. In fact, to watch all 4 of the film 2016 review shows this season. They're all on the iPlayer. Each one has a different presenter. There was Ben Bailey-Smith, there was Mariella Frostrup, there was Zoe Ball was the first one, and then Camilla Long, who's a very outspoken critic and probably should have been sat on the sofa rather than asked to listen to what people have to say, because that wasn't really her style. But it's interesting, this a show built around 30-second chunks of Danny Lee saying something insightful about a film. You know, how small the actual elements of critique and discussion are. And it made me a bit...
They don't know what to do with that programme, and it will die.
Well, perhaps. But then, I mean, the Camilla Long one was so kind of exciting as television, because her and Danny Lee had this kind of war
It's
thing.
a freak show, though. I mean, people aren't watching it because they think she's going to say anything amazing. They're watching it because they think she's going to say something dreadful.
No, and yet, it took me to an optimistic place, which maybe we can lead panel on, because it led me back to Mark Kermode. And Mark Kermode, when I was a teenager, he was on the radio. He was definitely one of the kind of big influences on my kind of burgeoning cinephilia. And then somewhere along the way, I just didn't connect or wasn't paying attention. And he does a live show at the BFI South Bank. And
he did it at the Lyceum in Edinburgh just a couple of weeks ago.
Indeed. So he's touring it around. He did it in Warwick as well, I think. And I remember walking out of my office at the BFI South Bank and just seeing a totally different crowd. So it was not the same age demographic that we usually get. It was kind of younger, popcorny, couples, groups of friends. It was a kind of different group. And so I thought, right, I must go and actually see what he has to say. And it's a 2-hour entertainment show. So there's musical interludes, there's kind of all these discussions, but it had the feel of religious fervour in the audience. His first question was, who here has been here before? 90% of the audience put their hands up, and there was that romance. It was very much a live experience, which maybe ties into
I think that's exactly
other stuff.
what film 2016 hasn't got, is that feeling of someone who really loves what they're talking about. That's what for all the things that they've tried with that show, they haven't found that very basic thing of, here is someone who wants to draw you into their thing. They've got people who are on contract who need a show to do. And they've got a critic who looks a bit depressed about being there because it's late at night. And, you know, it never feels like someone... And I went to see Mark's show when it was in Edinburgh, and I didn't know what it was going to be. And it's really lovely. You know, it's someone who is a massive enthusiast bringing you in. It's not particularly highbrow, nor is it geared towards anything mainstream or to do with current releases. It is just someone who is a fan and, you know, a personality. And I think that's what TV coverage of movie releases just isn't doing at all, and hasn't done for, I can't remember when the last TV program did that.
Well, I was hoping we were going to leave it on an optimistic note, but I think okay. But maybe we can find more of those communicators, and maybe in these new pools of writers and this new kind of diversity of writers that we've got, we're going to find more people who can.
Well, the one thing, good thing about Camilla Long is she started the first row about a film in this country that was followed by a wider group. I mean, even though she was completely wrong about it, you know, that at least it was a public row about cinema.
That's true.
And we've had hardly any of them, and we could do with more of those.
So
because it
more,
does inculcate.
Okay, more arguments is what we need, perhaps. All right, please join me in thanking panellists Nick, Hannah,